I have along the way, and I want to again encourage you to use the consumer division. The consumer division's job is to help customers work out these kinds of problems. I don't want to paint the world too black and white, and I truly mean that, but the company's primary goal is to collect the money. But they take the secondary goal seriously. I usually actually single out Kathy Orrick at NSTAR, who always has good an advocate for low-income people as any of us. She happens to work at NSTAR, but she really cares about low-income people. But the company's basic goal is they want to get paid. That's what their job is. The consumer division's job is to work things out, so do not be shy about going to the consumer division. The other advantage is I've flagged today a couple of things where I said, there was a bad pattern there and we changed the practice. If you don't go to the consumer division and kind of chat that up on our listserv, I don't know where those patterns are. And one of my jobs is to spot those patterns and fix the bad patterns. So it helps me and therefore people around the state if we're all going to the DPU, figuring out what the problems are systematically and solving them systematically. You have backup. The listserv is one form of backup. Most of the time I see questions on the listserv answered within a day, even if I'm not at my computer. You have GBLS's backup, which is your local legal services program, and we just entered a contract with them to handle utility intakes. So you've got access to that resource, and I know that GBLS is here a lot. So that's basically putting theory into practice. So I'm going to deal with a couple of miscellaneous situations, and then we'll wrap up in perhaps a half hour, maybe even a little less. Any questions before I go into these miscellaneous ones? So I'm on the slide called Miscellaneous Problems. The first one is landlord-tenant accounts. And in a certain way, this gets to Jared's question, or a variant of Jared's question. The regulations, and again, this is a separate regulation than those termination regulations and the elderly regs, so let me get you to the right page. It is Reg 25.04, starting on page 772. 25.04 and 72. You don't need to read it now, just know that it's there. Massachusetts says companies are supposed to make reasonable efforts to identify landlord accounts, that is an account in the landlord's name that affects tenants, which is going to be a little more common in Boston, which has big multifamily buildings, than a lot of other places. So of course it is physically possible to have a separate heating system and separate electric meters for everybody, but sometimes the landlord's paying for, the electricity or the heat. So the company's supposed to identify that situation, and before they could shut off the landlord for non-payment, they have to give reasonable notice to the tenants that they're about to lose service. So I just heard yesterday that foreclosures nationally are up yet again compared to both last month and compared to a year ago at the same time. So when the landlord's sliding into foreclosure, you can bet the landlord's not paying the electric and gas bill. The building is supposed to be posted in some way, either notices under each tenant's door or some kind of common area notice. The tenants then have the right to go to the DPU and have the DPU make an appropriate order. So I want to say first, this really is a situation where you want to call in legal services, because just like your question, Jared, this is as much a housing problem as it's a utility problem. We're usually talking about properties that are being seriously under-maintained by the landlord, disinvestment by the landlord. So there's a set of problems where getting legal services involved is important. These often are the larger buildings, so there's going to be a lot of tenants who are affected by it. And the relief you get at the DPU is tailored to the exact facts. So if the DPU knows, the tenants are withholding rent because they have to pay to fix the leaks in the building and the plumbing, or they're withholding rent for other legitimate reasons, the DPU is going to think, well, there's just so much they could pay to the utility bill. The DPU is also going to look at, are there seriously ill people in the building, because those people aren't customers, they can't directly assert serious illness protection, but the DPU wants to know, are there seriously ill people in the building? Are there infants in the building? Are these all low-income people who have limited ability to pay the bills? And the DPU is going to enter some order that kind of says to the utility company, just don't shut it off for a while, let these folks work out their legal problems with the landlord. Or they're going to say, tenants, if you pay X amount, the service won't go off. that amount is never going to be more than the landlord owes. I'm sorry, more than the current bills. And it may be even less than the current bills. The DPU say, if you just pay this amount for this period of time, we're going to make sure the service doesn't go off. So because of the large number of foreclosures, I want you to keep your eyes and ears open for these. The last, when I saw Liz Salucci from the DPU recently, she said the number of foreclosed property situations that the DPU is hearing about is just going up a lot, and we want the DPU and legal services involved. So any questions on that one? Okay, cross metering. And Jared, again, this one does go to your situation. In Massachusetts, tenants cannot be responsible legally. Legally, they should not be held responsible for utility bills. First, there has to be an agreement in writing that says, tenants, you're responsible for the utilities. So when you have a non-lease situation, just a month-to-month tenancy, nothing in writing, tenants can't be responsible for the utilities unless the landlord were to write out a separate piece of paper that says, it would basically be saying implicitly, yeah, you don't have a lease, but here's a piece of paper, you're responsible for the utilities. So it's illegal for the tenants to be held responsible for the utilities unless there's something in writing. That's in the sanitary code. And the second thing the sanitary code says is kind of a variation of the old one man, one vote, but this is one apartment, 1 meter. So I'm drawing a highly simplified 4-unit building. And those round things are meters. What the law says is if the tenants are responsible, even if there's something in writing, the only thing that they can be responsible for is running through a regular meter that measures only the usage in that apartment. So if this is the old huge one family that's divided into 3 apartments and they didn't exactly do it right, so one bedroom from your neighbor's apartment's on your meter or something like that, that's illegal. If somehow when the landlord kind of rehabbed the house and oops, he got it backwards, so he plugged in this apartment to the wrong meter and vice versa, that's illegal under the sanitary code. If there's an outbuilding, there's a garage or something that has electricity in it, and the landlord didn't pay to have a separate meter put in, and that's on the landlord's account, it would be illegal for anything outside the building to be on one tenant's meter. And with the let me just finish. With the exception of very small buildings, I think 3 units or less, any common area lighting or anything has to be on the landlord account. So, once you get to 4 units or more, there's always some kind of hallway. There might be something in the basement that's lit up so people don't kill themselves when they go into the basement. Landlord would have to have a separate meter. So the reason I drew a 5th meter is anything other than a small building where there really is no common area lighting, outside area lighting, basement area lighting, no garages, there would need to be a 5th meter. So one way to suspect cross metering is there's no extra meter. You count 4 apartments and there's only 4 meters, or you count 6 apartments and there's only 6 meters. The landlord didn't put any of that common stuff on his own meter. Richard?
That was my
Okay. So there is an exception for the small buildings, and the tenant who's responsible for that common meter, you'd have to have a separate piece of paper saying, okay, there's 2 lights in the hallway because it's just a small building. You, tenant, are responsible for those 2. Once again, it would be illegal if that wasn't in writing, because the basic rule is tenants are only responsible if a meter is properly measuring only their usage, nothing else. Okay? How do you know this might be going on? Well, I have a decent feel for what's kind of a ridiculously high electric or gas bill. Not that you would always know that for a fact. Fuel assistants could help you with that because they see enough of these, some of you who work enough with housing. So, if someone lives in a 1-bedroom apartment and they don't have any kind of exotic usage and they say, my bills are $300 a month, month in and month out, I'd ask them a lot about what their lifestyle is, and I'd say, something's going on. You're paying for somebody else in the building. So that's one flag. Another flags, and sometimes you hear this one, my neighbor moved out and when their power was shut off, when I moved out, when my power was shut off, my neighbor went out as well, any kind of situation like that. And if you know that there's an outbuilding, you just kind of suspect, I don't think there's a separate meter out there. So what do you do if you have the suspicion? Well, this is in the sanitary code, so it's like anything else where you call, in Boston, it's Inspectional Services Department. Generally, it's the Board of Health. In Boston, it's called Inspectional Services. You call them and ask them to do an inspection as if there were roaches running around the apartment, or the exterior locks didn't work on the building, or the windows were broken. However, you want to flag that you believe there's a metering violation, because the people who actually know how to do this is the wiring inspector, if it's electric, or if it's the gas supply, they're called the plumbing inspector, or sometimes the gas inspector. The regular inspector might not know how to spot this problem. You folks with me? So it's like any other sanitary code violation. If they write up a report, you send it to the utility company, and the bills come out of the tenant's name. There are variations of that. Sometimes it's not the entire bill. There's a limitation of time. You can only go back 2 years. But basically, once you get that citation, you give it to the utility company, and the utility bills come out of the tenant's name. They don't go back into the tenant's name until the landlord gets a second report saying we fixed the problem. And even then, the bills go to the tenant's name from that date forward. Tenants are not then, once again, responsible for those earlier bills.